Good evening, everybody. It is 7 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Beth. I'm the adult programming librarian for the Mid-Continent Public Library System. We're glad you could join us for this evening's program, Selecting and Planting Trees for Your Landscape. Before we get started, I do have some housekeeping items I wanted to go over and some upcoming programs to mention. The first thing that I'll mention is that I've put a link to a survey for tonight's program in the chat. So we hope you'll take a moment at the end of the program to fill that out and let us know how we did. We always appreciate the feedback. And if you have suggestions for other programs you'd like to see, you can feel free to write those in the comments as well. Our program this evening is being recorded, so I will send out the link to the recording in a couple days once that's ready. Because we are recording, we are going to ask folks to remain muted during the program so that we can get a good quality audio. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat, and we will save time for questions at the end as well as throughout the program. The other thing that I wanted to mention were some upcoming programs. So I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. And the first program that I want to mention is the Container Herb Garden. This is a virtual program that will be on March 20th. We're going to be joined by gardener Mark Lyons, who will be talking about uses for herbs and how you could grow them in an area as small as a container. That one you do need to register to receive the Zoom link to. On March 13th at 2 p.m., we have Joan Stack, who is with the Missouri State Historical Society, who will be talking about Missouri native George Caleb Bingham, and she'll be focusing on his election series of paintings from the 1850s that look at the contentious Civil War period and how the love of democracy helped to unite a nation. That one is also on Zoom, and you do need to register to receive the Zoom link there. On March 14th at 7 p.m., film critic Frank Mendoza will be back, and he will be sharing a program about Hattie McDaniels and Viola Davis. Hattie McDaniels holds the distinction of being the first African-American actress to receive the coveted Academy Award for acting, and Viola Davis remains one of the few performers who has been awarded an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. So be an interesting program there. Then on March 19th, we have a program that will be at our North Oak branch as well as on Zoom. If you want to attend virtually, you do need to register to receive the link, but local historian David Jackson will be joining us to talk about women who were integral to Kansas City and Jackson County in honor of Women's History Month. So he'll be covering from the early days of Kansas City with Madame Chouteau all the way up to Mayor Kay Barnes. And then finally, our friends from the North Kansas City Hospital will be joining us at 7 p.m. on Zoom on March 19th for a program called Music. It's a Total Brain Workout. And they'll be talking about research that shows how music can reduce anxiety, blood pressure, improve sleep quality, mental alertness, and memory. And get ideas on how you can use music to keep your brain young. So we hope that you will join us for some of these programs. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and introduce our presenter for this evening. Chuck Connor is a community forester with the Missouri Department of Conservation in the Kansas City region. And he has over 36 years of experience in the care of trees and forest land. He has previously worked for forestry departments in Southern Illinois, South Dakota State, and Purdue universities. For 10 years, he has worked with landscaping, tree care industry, and is an International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist. Connor completed the Society of Municipal Arborists Municipal Foresters Institute, served on the Midwest ISA Chapter Board of Directors, and acts as technical advisor to the Heartland Tree Alliance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck to get started.
Perfect. Thank you, Beth. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All righty. Thank you for that introduction. Again, my name is Chuck Connor, and I work with the Missouri Department of Conservation. I've had this job for over 20 years now. And I'm going to spend about 45 minutes this evening talking to you about how to pick a tree, then how to plant that tree in your yard so it'll grow into a mature asset in your landscape, and then go over some native trees that work well in the Kansas City area. So I'm not sure what happened to my view here. I can get my PowerPoint or Zoom, but not both together. Let me see.
You'll have to share your screen again.
Okay, hold on. There we go. Come on back. There. How is that? We good to go now?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. So what we're looking for with our homes and our neighborhoods and where we work is this. Research continues to show that the greener the areas we live, work, and play in, the better off we are economically, socially, mentally, and just health-wise. It's literally cradle to grave. They did a study on pregnant women in Portland, Oregon, and the more greenery they had within 100 meters of their home, the less chance their babies had of being born premature or low birth rate. So how green your environment is literally affects you even while you're still in the womb, and it goes all the way into your old age. You heal faster if you're in a hospital recovery room where you can see a green park-like setting. You enjoy your job better. You call in sick less, you stress less, and you live longer. So this is what we're looking for. But to get this, you have to pick the correct tree, the right tree for the right place, and plant it the right way, and then take care of it. And that's what I'm going to go over today. So again, a tree is a beautiful asset in a home or a park in the landscape. But if you put the wrong tree in the wrong place, it can actually be a liability too. So it's important to plan before you plant. And that way it just avoids problems down the road. So the first thing you want to do, most people do it backwards. What we do is we go to a nursery or we see a tree somewhere else and we fall in love with it. We go buy it in the nursery, bring it home, and then try to figure out where to plant it. What you want to do is assess your site, where you want to plant the tree, and then pick a tree that can thrive in those conditions. Now, we're in zone 6B now. When I first moved here 20 years ago, we were still zone 5. We've gone to zone 6B now, and they say by the end of this century, we'll be in zone 8, which is middle of Texas. So that's kind of shifting through time. But what I tell people is when you're picking a tree, go ahead and get a tree that's good for zone 5 for now. And that way you don't worry about if we do get an unusually cold winter, it freezing back to the ground. Look There are trees that grow 100 foot tall. There are trees that only grow 20 foot tall. Look how much space you have for the above ground or crown portion of the tree. If you've got a big spot and you want a lot of shade, pick a big tree for that area. But if you've only got a little area, don't pick a giant tree, because then you're going to have to try to fix that when it gets too big by pruning. Also, look below ground. What kind of space do you have for the roots? If you put a large tree in a smaller planting area, like a 4x4 cutout in a sidewalk, that it dwarfs it some. It's usually better to pick a smaller tree if you've got a small rooting space too. How much sunlight does it get? Some trees thrive in full sunlight, some like shade, some like partial shade. Of those, some like morning shade better than afternoon, a lot like afternoon better than morning. Then check your soil type and drainage, and I'll go over that here in just a minute. And then look up and think about what's below ground. Call and have your utilities marked before you plant, so you don't electrocute yourself or cut your fiber optics and your internet off, and before you start digging holes. And above ground, people plant way too close to utility lines, especially on larger trees. If you're going to put like a red oak in your yard, you need to be a minimum of 30, 40 feet away from overhead lines, or they're going to have to come in and side prune it, and it just doesn't look right. You've got a half a tree there. So if you do have utility lines in your yard, there are smaller trees or large shrubs that you can plant and will just do fine there, but just be aware of that. So for drainage, this is a red maple here. As long as this floods out temporarily where it only stays a day or two, a red maple will do fine there. But a lot of trees won't do fine in that situation. So know what kind of drainage you have. How you do that: dig a hole about 18 inches deep, fill it up with water, let that drain through, because especially now, we're in Armageddon drought right now, but put soil moisture in it, then refill it, and then just come back and check it in a couple hours. And what you're hoping to get is 1 inch water fall, or it going down an inch an hour. Or you can come back in 18 hours and there shouldn't be any water left in the hole. If you have drainage that's an inch an hour or faster, you don't have to worry about drainage when you're picking your trees. We're on prairie clay soils here. A lot of times they don't drain that fast, where after rains, they say saturated for a couple days. A lot of trees do not like having that. It's called wet feet. So if it's less than an inch an hour, you need to think about bottomland species, which are species that like to grow next to creeks and rivers. They can just handle that. So if you've got over an inch an hour, you can plant any tree you want. If it's slower or less than that, you need to pick species that can handle short periods of standing water. Then figure out why you want to plant. Are you looking to shade your deck? Does your neighbors have a bunch of junk in their yard? Do you want to screen? Are there flowers? Are you a birder? There are some great trees, deciduous holly, hawthorn, that bring birds in, crab apples in the fall that they just love on that. A lot of birds, especially if you've got a feeder up or a bird bath, it's nice to have an evergreen close by so they can have cover from predators when they're feeding on those. You'll get more birds in, and just other things. I'm not sure, what else there could be. It may be fall colors is what you're looking for, but kind of have, and there may be, a little bit of some of all of these, but kind of have in mind what purpose you want that tree to fulfill in your landscape before you go out and start looking at individual species. So some specifications in general. The faster the tree grows, the quicker you get shade, but the easier it is to fall apart in a wind or an ice load. So the faster the tree grows, the weaker the wood is in general. Just keep that in mind. Oaks grow way faster. If you pick the right oak for your house, they grow way faster than most people think. And their wood is incredibly strong. Then what size is that going to tree get at maturity? How high will it get on average? How wide? How big of a root zone does it need? And pick the right size tree for that spot. Growth habit and form, that's just some trees are round, some trees are pyramidal, and some trees look like sticks. They're very narrow and tall. If you need a narrow, tall tree, they make those in the nursery. If you want like a round, smaller tree, crab apples, flowering dogwoods, shrubs will do that. So, and then whether or not some trees like elms get a disease called Dutch elm disease that can be fatal to it. And they have new varieties now that are very resistant to that. And make sure if you want an elm tree, you buy those. Just realize that resistance is not immunity. They can still get it, but it usually won't kill them. They may lose a branch or two, or depending on what the tree species is and the disease or insect, it may look bad for a couple months, but it pulls out of them. But again, resistance is not immunity. If you're planting a tree that has a narrow pH requirement, which is how acidic or basic your tree is, test your soil first before you put it in. Some of the oaks and a lot of the maples and river birch too, especially, get what's called iron chlorosis, where on higher pH soils, they can't get the iron out of the soil and they have chronic health problems because of it. So if you know the tree you want likes an alkaline soil, and if it doesn't get that, it can mess it up, test for pH. If it says wide range of pH tolerance, you don't have to test for it. If you're planting anywhere near a road, especially one that's not in the country where they're going to salt. Again, if you're next to a business setting where they have sidewalks that they salt, try to look for tree species with a high salt tolerance, because we're in a society now where everyone's so worried about getting sued for someone slipping. We put way too much salt down, and then if it doesn't snow, no one gets a dustpan and a broom and sweeps it back up. And I've seen them kill 12-inch diameter oak trees in streetscapes from too much rock salt. Look for light requirements. If it's a tree that likes it in the shade, don't plant it in full sun. If it's a tree that likes full sun, make sure you put it in full sun. And then again, if there are known pest problems or if it's got messy fruit, just keep that in mind and see if you can live with that. And what kind of attributes, do you want interesting foliage or bark, good fall color? I think one of the most difficult things to do in landscaping is winter interest. Other than feeding the birds and witch hazel, there's not much you can do in the wintertime. But some trees have really, really neat bark. Lace bark elm does, Kentucky coffee tree, musclewood. And I'm going to show you some of these where you can actually get something that looks really neat in the winter time too. And I think that's really difficult. That's one of the most difficult things I think to do in gardening. So, maintenance requirements. Some trees require more pruning than others. Hardiness, I went through that again. I would still recommend for now plant in zone 5 trees for now. Check your drainage. And then if you can find out where the genetics of the tree came from, where that seed source came from, the closer to home you can get, the better. But that's difficult to find in most retail nurseries. Don't plant these species. If you do, don't call me and complain because I told you so. Especially Calorie pears. These are your Aristocrat, your Cleveland Select. There's a lot of different out there. It used to be called the Cultivar Bradford. That's no longer in the trade. But these they've gotten out. They're very aggressive. They're not native, and they're not a good tree. Ash species, I did not see ash in the nursery trade for about 10 years, and I saw it last year at a Home Depot in Lee Summit. If you buy that tree, you're going to have to treat it every year with insecticide and forever, or it's going to die. I was very disappointed to see that back in the nursery trade. So if they're selling ash trees, don't buy one. Once you figured out what species you have that fits your site and decided on a tree, it's time to bring it home and plant it. And there are two things you want to do. You want to make a nice hole to plant it in, and you want to make sure you're planting it at the proper depth. The proper depth, if you're walking through a natural forest settings, a lot of times if you're not looking at the ground, you're tripping because the roots are literally right on top of the ground, sometimes underneath the little bit of organic matter or leaf litter. And to plant a tree, we want that exact same thing. You want to look at the root flare right where the trunk widens out and goes into the ground, and you should be able to see the tops of the first roots coming out of the trunk. You want to plant that at soil grade, or if it's a bigger tree, like a 2 or 3 inch caliper tree, even an inch or two above grade, because the baller containers are so big, in time they pancake or settle down and those trees sink an inch or two. So what you want it to do is, after everything's settled, you want these roots to be at grade or ground level or an inch or two above. And this is what it should look like. The day you plant the tree, you should be able to walk up right here and see. Now, these shouldn't be all uncovered here, but you want this right here to be at your soil grade line. Because what happens is, if it's too deep in the pot or burlap or whatever container it's in, and it's got soil on top of it, and you plant that soil down here, instead of growing out away from the trunk, the roots tend to circle around and it can strangle the tree. And the problem with that does, it kills the tree, it compresses the trunk. The roots do so much that no matter how much rain you get or how much you water it, it can't move the water up the trunk because the roots are strangling it, and it dies. And the biggest heartache with this is it usually occurs 10 to 12 years after the trees have been planted, and then you've got to cut the tree down and start all over again. So again, if you don't plant, right here should be your grade. Right here should have been grade. The roots grow up and around. Also, if they're in pots, before you plant them, take them out of the pot, and you can tell this is the size of the pot the day they planted it. And when they pulled it out of the pot, all the roots were growing around the edge of the pot because they can't get out of the plastic pot. And they didn't address that. They just put it in the hole. Well, the roots aren't going to straighten themselves out by themselves, so they just continue to grow in place instead of going out and colonizing your yard. So what you need to do is when you pull this plant originally out of the pot, realize these roots were only a few millimeters to maybe pencil thick at the most. They should have got a sharp shovel or an old pruning saw and shaved about, for this size, about an inch all the way off the edge, and just cut all those roots all the way off, all the way down the side edge. And that way, when they cut them, if they would have cut these, those roots will reinitiate and grow out instead of being trapped encircling the tree. Here they did it again, but you can't really tell from this angle, but the roots came out. They hit this is where the bottom of the pot was. So then they turned 90 degrees till they hit the edge of the pot. Then they turned back up. So again, they should have shaved all the edges off of that pot before they put it in the ground. So this is what a hole should look like. The flare, where you can see the first roots just starting to come out of that trunk and the trunk flares out or gets wider, should be at or just above ground level. Then your hole should be 3 times the distance that the pot is at a minimum. So this one, let's say this is a foot from here to here, you want a 3-foot wide hole. If you're in good soil, you can make it like this. It's just less digging. If you're in clay soil, go ahead and square it off and come out. Because the problem with this in heavy clay, if we get an inch of rain, it'll fill up this deep in water and it can drown your plant. The reason you don't have to go this far in good soil is as long as it drains well, roots don't grow down this way. They grow out this way. So what you're doing by making a wide but shallow hole, all what you're doing, you're going back in, you're taking the dirt out and then putting the same dirt back in. Don't amend it, don't put peat moss in it. What you're doing is loosening the soil so it isn't as compact, and it makes it easier on those roots to colonize out and start moving into your soil. If you're using burlap instead of containers, cut all the burlap off at minimum the top half of the ball. So remove all the burlap that's around the trunk on top to down here. What I usually do is just cut it on both sides and then just push it down so it's wadded up at the bottom of the hole, and then put dirt on top of it. Because again, the roots don't grow down this way, they grow out. So if you've got a ball of burlap down in here, it's not going to affect those roots. They're going this way. Once you've got it set and it's straight up and down, you can put 2 to 4 inches of mulch on. But again, keep the mulch away from the trunk, because if you cover that trunk back up with mulch, instead of growing out away from the trunk, the roots are going to want to grow around it, and you're going to get those stem girdling roots. Only stake a tree. Let it stay up for a week or two. Go through a windstorm. If it falls over, go ahead and stake it up. Most container trees need to be staked because they won't stay up by themselves. Balled and burlap trees, this is a ball of soil. They weigh 200-300 pounds. Most of those don't need to be staked. Park and rec departments and commercial plantings do that because they make the trees harder to vandalize and steal, which I'm good for in those settings, but that's usually something you don't need to do in a residential homeowner situation. So in those situations, if you're planting it in your yard, Don't stake it unless it just won't stay up on its own. If you're planting in the side of a hill, you can't plant like this because you're burying, again, you can't keep this side of the bowl above grade. You're burying everything on this side of the bowl is too deep and this side's too high. So you either got to make a cutout so you can get that top of the bowl where the flare is at or above grade, or you can bring in fill so it's at or above grade. But if you just try to do it this way, this side's too deep and this side's going to be too high. Again, this is a tree I had just planted. I did stake it because it was a very small tree and it was a container grown, not a Baldwin burlap. But when you plant a tree, you should be able to walk up, look down the stem and see the top of the first main roots coming out. Okay, that's what you're looking for. That's a good tree. Then again, you want to mulch it, but you want to keep that mulch away from the trunk, because if you mulch all the way up to the trunk, you spend all that time measuring the hole to get it the right depth, only to bury it again, but with mulch instead of dirt. What mulch does is it keeps you from hitting it with weed eaters and lawnmowers. It helps, especially during drought, to maintain soil moisture so the tree doesn't dry out as quick. It helps control weeds. It prevents spikes in soil temperatures, and it improves that soil structure by that mulch breaks down into organic matter. And it also, since it retains moisture, it draws in earthworms and other invertebrates into the soil, and they help make that soil less compact and healthier. And again, 1 to 3, 2 to 4 inches deep, and keep it about 4 inches away from the root flare. And again, if you don't, I guarantee you, if it's in a turf situation, someone's going to hit it with a lawnmower. This is lawnmower injury right here, or they're going to get them with a weed eater, because that's the only way they can get that grass trimmed around there. Too much of a good thing, again, if you volcano mulch, you see this a lot of times in commercial settings. They just don't know any better. Again, they've buried that root flare. There's a whole bunch of problems that occur with this. Everything from mice and voles getting underneath there and eating the bark off the tree, to, again, the roots love growing in mulch because it's got a lot of water holding capacity and it's very aerobic, or got a lot of oxygen in there. And what's going to happen is the roots are going to come up into this mulch layer and start growing around the tree, and then it's going to girdle it. So what you want your mulch to look like is a donut, not a volcano, okay? 2 to 4 inches deep. The farther out you go, the better it is for the tree, the faster it'll get through transplant shock. And again, so 2 to 4 inches deep, go far out, the farther the better. I like 6 inches in diameter, 6 feet in diameter, so a 3-foot radius around the tree, and then 2 to 4 inches deep. And I like double ground hardwood or cypress mulch is what I like. Pine straw works well. Compost can do well too. So, but keep your trees mulch. Especially the last few years, we have been so droughty. Mulching really can be a lifesaver to our trees. So now you know how to look at your site and figure out what kind of tree you need, and you know how to plant a tree. So now I'm going to go over some native trees in Missouri that work well in the Kansas City area.
And Chuck, before you start that, we did
You
have a
bet.
question.
Yes.
I thought I heard you say don't amend soil when planting. So do you or don't you recommend adding mics to soil when planting?
Adding what to soil?
Mics, M-Y-K-E-S?
I do not know what Mike's is. I don't recommend amending the soil at all. And here's why. For that tree to become a mature tree, whether it matures at 12 foot or 100 foot in your yard, it is going to have to like your soil. When you walk up to a tree and you stand at the end of the branches on a mature tree, the roots will go 2 to 4 times that distance out farther. They colonize an immense amount of soil because when it gets droughty, unlike an animal that can walk to water, a tree is stuck there. So the only way it can live through droughts is to have a huge profile of soil colonized. Now, if your house is in the way or a street, it's going to constrict that. But a tree in a field, if you stand at the end of the branches, the roots are going to go 2 to 4 times farther out than the branches do. Okay? So if a tree hates your soil, so you amend a planting hole that's only going to be 3 times wider than the pot to make it where it likes it. The only thing you're doing is making it like the first 3 feet and ensuring it's going to live through the 1-year nursery guarantee, and then it's going to die because your soil isn't good for it. Does that make sense? Your tree has to like your soil to become mature and healthy. The only thing you're going to do if you amend it is make poor soil good in a little bitty hole to make sure the nursery's not going to repay because you picked the wrong tree. You're going to have to do it. If the tree doesn't like your soil, you pick the wrong species of tree. Does that make sense? To amend soil to have a mature tree, you need to amend your yard, the neighbors on this side yard, and the neighbors on that side yard. So again, there's not enough area you can economically and time-wise and just logistically amend to turn poor soil into good soil for a tree. Now, that'll work for a pansy. It'll work for a begonia because they're only going to get this tall, right? So the roots are going to go this far. Knock yourself out. But a tree needs a massive amount of soil to colonize when it's mature. And if it doesn't like your soil, you can't amend enough square footage to make it happen. You have to pick a tree that works for your soil volume. Does that make sense? No, I'm going to just keep going then. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to guess. Red maple. Red maple is always number one on people drive around and they see the fall color, beautiful fall color. It is marginal in our area. And there is an exotic bug that's in the United States called Asian longhorn beetle. And when we get it here, not if, but when it comes here, maples are its preferred host. So just be aware of it. This is overplanted and marginal. Sugar maple, much harder wood, much stronger. You can get yellow, orange, or reddish colors sometimes on the same tree. Much better tree, and it's not planted as much in our area. Ohio or red buckeyes are very pretty trees. They're one of the first to leaf out. They're smaller trees. If you want something that's not as big, they are beautiful. Really distinctive palmately compound leaves. The red buckeye's got this pretty red inflorescence on it. The Ohio buckeye's more of a whitish, greenish color. There's a bottle brush buckeye. There's some really pretty buckeyes out there. But for a smaller tree, medium to small tree, or a very large shrub, these are good for yards. Downy serviceberry, profuse white blooms in the spring, beautiful fall color. It tends to work better in full sun than dogwoods do. So if you're kind of looking for a dogwood but don't have shade, this is usually a better alternative. They come both single stemmed or multi-stemmed like these are. I recommend the multi-stem ones. It's hard to keep them pruned in those single stems. They don't seem to do as well, I don't think. If you're looking for something really unique, or a screen to plant between your yard and the neighbors because you don't like your neighbors, this is called Hercules Club or Devil's Walking Stick. It's native. More common down in the Boot Heel, or if you start getting towards like the Smoky Mountains, Tennessee, North Carolina, it's all over the place. But it grows in colonies, so you'll want to be able to maintain it by mowing around it. But if you plant this, it's really cool looking. And these aren't very long, but as you can tell, the whole woody part of the plant is just covered in thorns. Pawpaw is a very unique tree. This is the flower. I need to get a better picture. This is a pawpaw flower, but there's also a buckeye in this too. So I'll get a better picture next time. But anyway, they have a fruit that's in the custard apple family that's very good if you can pick them before the raccoons do. But it's a very pretty tree. A medium tree, does great in the shade, and a pretty yellow fall color. I like this tree. River birch, everything on it's unique. It's got a unique leaf. Fall color's just kind of a yellow, but the bark is really pretty. Having said that, they always want to sell them in clumps, and they get too big to be a clump tree. So if you're going to plant river birch, make sure it's one trunk. Don't do this, because what happens when they get big, they grow together and they rub on each other when the wind blows them, and they start to rot, and then they fall over or break out. So if you want a river birch, do a single stem one. American hornbeam is also called blue beech or musclewood. It's a very unique, in the summertime, spring, it just looks like a tree. But as it matures and gets older, the bark is very smooth and it flutes where it looks like mussels. That's why they call it musclewood. This is a really good tree for winter interest. As it grows, you'll want to keep removing the lower branches to show more and more of this trunk. And as it matures, it's really something unique. Not a lot bothers it too. Hackberry and sugarberry are native in our areas. They're pretty hardy trees. Butterflies, some butterflies exist solely on this tree. Just a good native tree. Buttonbush are very large bushes. They've got a really neat flower on them, and then it turns into, they almost look kind of like buttons, I guess. But if you like butterflies, it's a great, again, large shrub, small multi-stem tree to plant. Redbud is an awesome fall or spring flowering plant. This is native all over. It gets herbicide damage very easily. And now with Roundup 2,4-D and dicamba ready crops, we're getting more and more herbicide damage on these. I've got about 100 of these planted on my property, and they're starting to get hit. So at least 3 or 4 times with herbicide every year, and it's starting to affect them. Again, just pretty tree. Yellowwood, if you know what an American ash looks like, a green or white ash, it looks similar, but it'll be smaller. It's got a white kind of pea looking flowers on it, pea-shaped flowers that are on it in late May, early June. Not planted often, so that's good. It's kind of a unique tree. Alternate leaved or pagoda dogwood. It's a dogwood, pretty hardy. It's hard to find in the nursery trade, but if you can find alternate leaved or pagoda dogwood, they're very pretty. And to me, they seem to be a little hardier than just straight Cornus Florida or flowering dogwood, especially if you're going to try it in a full sunlight situation. I would still like at least some morning or afternoon sun on this, though. Flowering dogwood, everyone loves this tree. Put it in afternoon shade. You should be okay. The birds love it. Great fall color. Huge white flowers in the spring. Very pretty tree. Touchy. Smoke tree. This is an extremely large one. If you want to see the Missouri champion, it's at the Vale Mansion in Independence. Very pretty tree. They call it a smoke tree. The inflorescence here, the tree almost looks like it's smoking. They have purple leaf and green leaf varieties. Really pretty tree. And again, that photo I showed you, this is an extremely large one. Most of them are going to get about maybe 12, 15 foot tall maximum, but very pretty. Not much bothers them. If you like birds, the hawthorns, green hawthorns, this is a winter king. They get a disease called cedar quince rust that can make them kind of look a little ragged. I wouldn't want this in a front yard as a specimen tree, but if you've got a larger yard and can have it farther away, the birds absolutely love both nesting in these trees because they're somewhat thorny, but they love the fruit too. Flowers are okay, but boy, if you like birds, this is a great bird tree. Eastern wahoo looks a lot like burning bush. It's in the euonymus family too. And the fruit on it looks like American bittersweet, if you know what that looks like. But instead of being red and orange fruit in the center, it's fuchsia, it's pink. This is going to get maybe 5 to 8 foot tall around here, and it'll kind of get leggy where it bows over. But if you want something unique for a medium shrub to a very small tree, wahoo's a decent one to put in. Honey locust, this is overplanted, but it's still a good tree. They're thornless varieties out now, and very light shade. So if you want something that's got very small leaves, not much cleanup with this tree, this could be a good tree. An alternative to that is Kentucky coffee tree. It gets much bigger. This is one leaf. This is all one leaf here. This can be 3 foot or more long. A very unique looking tree. It looks cool in the wintertime because when your leaves are this big, there's not a thin branch on this tree. Every branch is thumb size in diameter or larger. So it looks really unique in the wintertime. The bark does too. It does have this big seed pod on it. If you don't worry about that, if you're planting it out back and you don't care, that's fine. But if you got it over like a driveway or a deck, they have nearly seedless varieties. Espresso's one. There's some more out there. So if you want it less messy, they do have seedless varieties of this. Deciduous holly. It's a holly bush. And again, deciduous, all the leaves will fall off of it. And then the females will be absolutely covered in red berries. Again, if you're a birder, these are fantastic trees to plant if you like watching birds in the wintertime. Plant multiples because male and female are going to be on different trees. Once they get sexually mature, and you can tell, you can cut all the males out except one and then just have like, I don't know, depends on how many you end up with, but you can have all females and one male. Eastern red cedar is the only native evergreen we have around here. It's the only one that does really well. They grow even where you don't want them. There are cultivated varieties. If you want one that looks more formal, Brody, B-R-O-O-D, I think E-Y. It may be just B-R-O-O-D-Y, but it's a good Eastern red cedar cultivar. They're really good for winter cover for songbirds, especially like if you got a bird bath you keep out with a heater on it or a feeder. It's nice to plant one of these close to that feeding station to give them cover. Tulip trees, everything on a tulip tree looks unique. The buds, the leaves, they have these huge tulip looking flowers on them. They come out when the tree's fully leafed out and they're green, so they're kind of inconspicuous, but it's still a really, really neat tree. Fast growing, so you're going to want to prune it properly as it's growing so it doesn't fork, because the wood is fairly weak. And if you let this fork and we get an ice storm or a heavy wind load on it, it'll break out and you'll have a half a tree. Osage orange, they have thornless, fruitless varieties now. A really popular one in the trade right now is called White Shield. If you've got a really tough site, if you've got like a parking lot island or a 4x4 cut out in a sidewalk, boy, these are tough as nails. So this would be a good tree to put in a hot, dry, rugged situation. If you grow rocks, hedge is a good thing to put there. Black gum, if you've got a wet place in your yard where it doesn't drain well, black gum, if you see it's also called water tupelo. This can grow in swamps. They have cultivated varieties out now called Red Rage Fall Fiesta that have a more uniform red fall color. This is going to be a medium tree and very pretty native fall color. It comes on in the fall. The rest of the year just kind of looks like a normal green tree, but they really showcase themselves in the winter. Hophorn beam or ironwood, again, it has a really kind of unique bark. The leaves are glossy. The flowers look like the flowers from a hop tree that they make beer out of. Nice smaller native tree for yards if you need something small. Sourwood, this tree flowers in July, holds them into August, September, and then it turns red with the flowers on it. It is native to the Collie Ridge area in the Boot Hill, Missouri. Having said that, this tree has zero drought resistance. So if you're going to plant this, it should be in an irrigated bed with good drainage. And one summer, if you forget to turn the irrigation on, you're going to have firewood. This tree is not drought tolerant. It's marginal in our area. But if you're dedicated to providing supplemental water when we get dry and you have well-drained soil, it is a beautiful tree. They do work better out west. You get around Massachusetts and boy, they grow some pretty sourwood out there. Sycamore are native. They grow great in wet areas. They're riparian species. They get huge. This is a full-grown adult here. Beautiful, large trees. I really like sycamores. Tough, too. The oaks are very good. We have a ton of native oaks that work well here. I'm just going to go through them really quick. They all do well they all get big. Oak trees of all plants on earth, more life, whether it's bats, mammals, birds, invertebrates, insects, more life depends on the genus Quercus or oaks in the world than any other plant. So if you want to have a beautiful shade tree and do your part for the food web and biodiversity, plant an oak tree. White oak is a beautiful tree. Swamp white oak is my favorite large maturing yard tree. Bur oaks are very common in the woods around here. It's very good on prairie soil. If you ever saw Dances with Wolves where it's just a prairie with one huge tree in the middle of nowhere, those are bur oak. Northern red oak are very pretty too. Shumard oak looks kind of like a cross between a northern red and a pin oak, but unlike pin oaks, instead of the branches growing down, they're growing upright like northern red. Good reddish fall color too. Those are the oaks. If you've got another bald cypress and you want a bulletproof tree that looks like a spruce or a pine tree, those are all marginal here. Bald cypress will do that. It's a deciduous conifer. The fruiting structure is a cone, deciduous. All these turn golden brown in the fall and fall off, then put new ones on in the spring. But a pretty tree. American lindens, don't plant little leaf linden because we've got a Japanese beetle now and they hammer them. They're not native anyway. But American linden, sold a lot of times as Redmond, also called basswood. Really good trees. Bees love them. Great native mature tree for bees. And again, American elm. If you're my age or older, you remember American elms being everywhere, and they died out when we brought over Dutch elm disease in the 60s, early 70s. We now have cultivated varieties of straight American elms that are doing wonderful. They've been in the landscape over 20 years and they seem to be doing great. Princeton is one. They were growing it in central Kansas in unirrigated places, and it was growing an average of 2 inches in diameter a year. In diameter. So that means in 5 years, on average, you've got a tree 4.5 feet off the ground that's 10 inches wide. So if you need a shade tree and you want a native tree and you're older and you just bought a new house with new trees, this could be your tree if you've got the space for it. And with that, if we've got questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
I don't see any questions at the moment, but go ahead if you've got questions and type them in the chat. While we're waiting on that, I did send out an email to everyone with the link to the survey, as well as some handouts that Chuck has provided for us, including that list of trees that he went over. So
and those handouts, really quick, the list of trees has how tall they get, how wide they get, what kind of soil they like, whether they have sun or shade. So that's a really good reference for you.
And we do have a question. Do you recommend planting fruit trees? If so, what kind?
Okay. I like, if you're going to plant fruit trees, the native ones like blackberry and pawpaw and the native persimmons. There are no truly around here native fruit trees like you see at the grocery store. And if you're going to try to get pretty looking fruit out of them, whether it's apple or apricot or pear or peach, you are going to have to spray fungicides and or insecticides all growing season, usually at a 10 to 14 day schedule, depending on what species you're trying to grow and what time of year it is. So it's a lot of work. you're going to have to thin the fruit. What I tell people is plant trees in your yard. For most people, unless you're a huge gardener, plant a tree in your yard for shade, wildlife, and beauty. Buy your fruit at the store. Because for most people, to get fruit that doesn't have bugs in it, isn't wormy, is way too much spraying of pesticides to be worth it. It's a lot of work. I would much rather grow beans than tomato plants.
Does the American elm continue to grow multiple inches per year its whole life? How wide do they end up?
They can get big. They can get big. That'll slow down as the tree gets more mature. That will slow down, because I would imagine once you start getting 12 to 15 inches, it'll slow down, because to put the same amount of biomass around a cylinder that large, it gets less and less. But American elms have the potential to get huge. It wouldn't get huge in 30 years, but it's going to be big in 30 years.
And I did put the link to the survey in the chat again.
And just real quick, this is my email on the screen right now, charles.connor@mdc.mo.gov. If you got other questions in a week or two or in a month when you're at a nursery, if you're not sure, email me. That's the best way to get a hold of me. I'm out of the office too much for phones. We play a lot of tag. But just email me and ask me what I think. Tell me, hey, it's in full sun, small space. What do you think about this before you buy it?
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and end the program then. Thank you, Chuck. A lot of great information there. And thank you, everybody, for coming this evening. Again, check for that email with the handouts, and I will send out the link to the recording once it is available on the MCPL YouTube channel. It'll probably take a couple of days before that happens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a great evening, everybody. Bye.